The midday sun burned high above the village of Umuokeke, casting long shadows beneath the mighty udara tree. Adaeze stood among her friends, her fingers brushing against the rough bark as they reached for the ripe, golden fruits hanging overhead. The girls laughed, their skirts swishing as they danced around the tree, tossing udara seeds into their mouths and sharing playful gossip. But soon, as the sun dipped westward, their laughter faded. The rule was simple: no one stayed near the udara tree past afternoon. "Let's go," Chinello urged, her voice tinged with unease. "The elders say this place is not safe after midday." The others nodded, stepping away hesitantly, but Adaeze only scoffed. "Do you really believe those old stories?" she asked, rolling an udara fruit between her fingers. "It's just a tree." Her friends exchanged nervous glances before hurrying down the narrow footpath toward the village. Alone now, Adaeze turned her gaze upward, admiring the way the sun glowed through the thick canopy. A sudden wind rustled the leaves, and she shivered despite the warmth of the day. Then, a deep voice echoed through the air. "So, you have finally stayed behind." Adaeze spun around, her heart hammering. Before her stood an old woman, tall and draped in black, her wrinkled face twisted in a knowing smile. In one hand, she held a wooden staff, its surface covered in strange carvings. The ground trembled. Adaeze gasped as the udara tree's roots began to shift, lifting from the earth like writhing serpents. Around her, the forest darkened, and the air grew thick with whispers. A circle of figures appeared from the shadows, their eyes glowing like embers. The old woman raised her staff, and the figures began to dance. "Welcome, Adaeze," the woman said. "We have been waiting for you." Adaeze's feet refused to move. She wanted to run, to scream, but an invisible force held her still. The old woman's piercing gaze bore into her, and as the witches danced, the air around Adaeze grew heavy. Their movements were hypnotic, fluid, yet unnatural, their limbs twisting like smoke in the wind. The udara tree, once familiar and welcoming, now pulsed with an eerie glow, its roots stretching out like fingers eager to claim her. "You are special, Adaeze," the old woman continued, her voice like the wind sweeping through dry leaves. "Your blood is not ordinary. It carries the mark of the chosen. That is why you could not leave with your friends. The spirits called you to us." A cold shiver ran down Adaeze's spine, but deep within her, something stirred a strange excitement, an urge she could not explain. The witch's chants grew louder, rising in an unsettling harmony. The old woman raised her staff and struck it against the ground. Immediately, Adaeze felt a rush of energy flood her body, her skin tingling as if an unseen hand had reached inside her soul and unlocked something long buried. Her vision blurred, and suddenly, she saw images flashing before her eyes: women dressed in black, flying through the night sky, a river that flowed backward, its waters whispering secrets, a fire burning without consuming its wood. She gasped as she felt her feet leave the ground for a brief moment, her body weightless, her spirit lifted. The witches cheered. "She is ready," one of them declared. The old woman stepped forward and placed a dark, twisted bead necklace around Adaeze's neck. "From this night forth," she said, "you belong to us." As the chants faded, Adaeze felt something change within her. She was no longer the same girl who had come to pluck udara fruits. She had been chosen, and there was no turning back. When Adaeze opened her eyes, the forest was silent. The witches had disappeared, leaving no trace of their eerie dance. The udara tree stood still, its roots back in place, as if nothing had ever happened. But Adaeze knew better. Something inside her had changed. She glanced down at the dark bead necklace resting against her chest. It felt warm, almost alive. A part of her wanted to rip it off and throw it away, but another part, something stronger, whispered that it belonged to her now. With slow, measured steps, she made her way back to the village, her mind clouded with confusion and curiosity. The moment she stepped onto the dusty path leading home, a strange sensation gripped her. Every sound was sharper: the rustling of palm trees, the distant bleating of goats, even the muffled laughter of children playing in the compound. The world felt different, and yet nothing had changed. As she entered her family's compound, her mother, Nena, rushed toward her. "Adaeze, where have you been?" she cried, gripping her daughter's arms. "You were supposed to be back hours ago." I lost track of time," Adaeze mumbled, suddenly aware of how dry her throat felt. Her father, Okonkwo, stepped forward, his sharp eyes narrowing. "Are you sure? You look different, Adaeze." Adaeze swallowed hard. She could feel their concern, their fear, but how could she explain what had happened? That she had danced with witches beneath the udara tree, that she had been chosen? That night, as she lay on her mat, she heard whispers, soft voices calling her name. The air grew cold, and shadows moved against the walls. A new power surged through her veins, and for the first time in her life, Adaeze felt something she had never known before: control. She smiled in the darkness. The morning sun rose over Umuokeke, casting golden light over the thatched rooftops. Adaeze sat quietly on the wooden stool outside her family's hut, peeling cassava with her mother. The knife in her hand moved with surprising ease, her fingers precise, faster than before. "Adaeze," Nena said, watching her daughter closely, "you barely spoke during supper last night. Are you feeling well?" Adaeze hesitated. She felt better than ever, but something inside her told her not to speak too much. "I'm fine, Mama," she said, forcing a smile. "Just tired." Before her mother could press further, a loud wail broke through the morning air. The cry came from their neighbor's compound. Adaeze and her mother exchanged glances before rushing to see what had happened. Inside the compound, a small crowd had gathered. A woman knelt beside a broken clay pot, weeping uncontrollably. "It is my son," she cried. "He is burning with fever, yet the herbalists can do nothing." Adaeze's eyes drifted toward the small hut, where the boy lay trembling, his body slick with sweat. Something deep within her stirred. She knew she could help him. The knowledge was simply there, as if it had always belonged to her. Without thinking, she stepped forward. "Let me see him," she said. The villagers turned to her in surprise. "What can a child do?" An elder scoffed. But before anyone could stop her, Adaeze placed her hands on the boy's forehead. The moment she touched him, a chilling sensation ran through her fingertips. A whisper echoed in her ears, ancient words she did not recognize. Suddenly, the boy gasped, his eyes flying open. The fever was gone. Gasps filled the air. Adaeze stumbled backward, her heart pounding. She had healed him without medicine, without effort. Her mother grabbed her wrist. "What did you just do?" Adaeze had no answer, but deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The village of Umuokeke buzzed with gossip. By midday, everyone had heard about Adaeze's miraculous healing. Some called it a blessing, others a curse. Women whispered behind their palms. Elders exchanged wary glances, and children ran ahead of their mothers, eager to catch a glimpse of the girl with the strange power. Inside her family's hut, Adaeze sat stiffly as her parents stared at her. Her mother's hands trembled as she clutched her wrapper. "Adaeze, tell us the truth," she whispered. "How did you heal that boy?" Adaeze's fingers brushed the bead necklace around her neck. I don't know," she lied. Her father, Okonkwo, let out a sharp breath. "You don't know?" His voice was laced with suspicion. "People are saying things, Adaeze, that this power is not from Chukwu, that it is unnatural." A chill ran through Adaeze. She could feel it, an invisible presence lingering in the air, watching, waiting. She lowered her gaze. "I only wanted to help," she said. That night, the whispers returned. They drifted through the air like a melody only she could hear, weaving through the cracks in the walls, curling around her like smoke. You have tasted your power, Adaeze. There is more to come. A sudden gust of wind pushed open the wooden window. The air smelled of rain, though the sky had been clear. In the corner of the room, shadow flickered. Adaeze did not move. Do not fight it, the whisper urged. Your path has been chosen. Her heartbeat slowed. The fear in her chest faded, replaced by something new: acceptance. As the night deepened, Adaeze closed her eyes and let the darkness welcome her. She was no longer afraid. By morning, the rumors had grown louder. The villagers no longer whispered, they spoke openly. Their voices tinged with both awe and fear. Some believed Adaeze was blessed by the gods, a healer chosen by unseen forces. Others were convinced she was possessed, that her powers came from the dark world. Her mother, Nena, could no longer stay silent. That afternoon, she grabbed Adaeze's wrist and dragged her toward the village church. We must cleanse you, she said firmly. This power, whatever it is not of God. Adaeze did not resist. She followed quietly, though deep within her, something burned. A quiet voice whispered warnings, but she ignored them. Maybe her mother was right. Maybe she needed cleansing. The moment they stepped into the small, mud brick church, the atmosphere changed. The air felt thick. The walls seemed closer than before. The village priest, a tall, lean man named Reverend Ease, stood at the altar, his Bible clutched tightly in his hand. His eyes darkened the moment he saw Adaeze. You have come to the right place, he said, his voice steady. The devil is cunning, and he takes the form of innocence. Adaeze's jaw clenched. The devil? Was that what they thought of her? She had done nothing wrong. The congregation gathered, their voices rising in song. The priest dipped his fingers into a bowl of holy water and approached her. In the name of Jesus Christ, he declared, pressing a wet cross onto her forehead. Be free from whatever has taken hold of you. A sharp pain shot through Adaeze's head. She gasped, stumbling backward. The whispers inside her grew louder, angrier. The bead necklace burned against her skin. Then, without warning, a gust of wind tore through the church, blowing out every candle. The wooden pews trembled, and the walls groaned as if something ancient had awakened. Screams erupted. The priest stepped back, his hands shaking. This is not normal. Adaeze lifted her head, her eyes glowing with something unnatural. She did not speak, but the message was clear. She was not leaving the darkness. The darkness had already claimed her. The church was in chaos. Women clutched their children. Elders muttered prayers, and Reverend Ease stood frozen, his Bible trembling in his grip. The wind that had stormed through the building died as suddenly as it had come, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Adaeze stood in the center, breathing heavily, the bead necklace around her neck pulsed, as though alive. She felt powerful, yet something deep inside her stirred with uncertainty. Her mother rushed to her, gripping her shoulders. Adaeze, what is happening to you? She cried, tears in her eyes. This is not my daughter. Adaeze looked at her mother, and for the first time she saw fear, real fear. Her own mother no longer recognized her. The priest gathered his strength and took a step forward. She is possessed, he declared, his voice steadier than before. We must perform a full deliverance. The villagers murmured in agreement. Some nodded. Others glanced at Adaeze with suspicion and dread. The decision had been made, but before anyone could move, the shadows in the corners of the church stretched, creeping toward Adaeze like living things. A cold, unearthly laugh echoed through the room. Though Adaeze's lips had not moved, the voice belonged to something else. She is ours. The candles relit themselves, flickering wildly. The walls stopped trembling, but an undeniable presence lingered in the air. The message was clear. Adaeze had been claimed. She turned to the priest, her gaze dark and unreadable. "I do not need saving," she said, her voice oddly calm. "You cannot save someone who has already been chosen." Then, without another word, she turned and walked out of the church. No one dared to follow her. The night was darker than usual. Even the moon, which often bathed Umuokeke in its silver glow, was hidden behind thick, unmoving clouds. Adaeze sat outside her family's hut, staring into the distance. She could feel them watching, waiting. Her mother had not spoken to her since the incident in the church. Her father barely looked at her. Fear had settled over the household like a heavy fog. Adaeze knew they were praying, hoping that by morning, she would return to the daughter they once knew. But she would not. A sudden rustling broke the silence. Adaeze turned sharply. A tall, shadowy figure stood by the udara tree. The old woman, the one who had welcomed her into the fold of witches. "You have done well," the woman said, her voice like the wind whispering through dry leaves. "They now know who you truly are." Adaeze swallowed. "They fear me," she admitted. "Even my own mother." The woman stepped closer, her dark robes flowing like smoke around her feet. "Fear is power, Adaeze," she said, "and you have only begun to taste it." A cold hand touched Adaeze's shoulder, and a wave of energy surged through her body. Visions flashed before her eyes, herself soaring above the village, the earth bending to her will, people kneeling before her in submission. "You belong to us now," the woman continued. "The old world no longer holds you." For a moment, Adaeze hesitated. A part of her, the part that still remembered her mother's warm embrace, her father's proud smile, wanted to resist. But the power was intoxicating. The woman extended her staff. "Come, child. It is time you fully embrace your destiny." Adaeze looked back at the hut one last time, then took the old woman's hand. The night swallowed them whole. The clearing erupted into celebration. The witches moved as one, their bodies swaying to a rhythm Adaeze could not hear, but felt deep within her bones. The flames of the blue fire danced higher, casting eerie shadows that twisted and curled like living things. Adaeze stood in the center, her heart pounding. The energy inside her pulsed with each beat of the drums that suddenly echoed through the night. The old woman stepped forward, placing a cold hand on Adaeze's forehead. "It is time," she whispered. The moment her hand lifted, Adaeze's body moved on its own. Her feet glided over the earth as if she were weightless. Her arms stretched, her fingers curled, and suddenly, she was dancing like she had done beneath the udara tree. Only this time, it was different. This time, she was one of them. The other witches joined her, their voices rising in an eerie, melodic chant. The earth beneath them trembled, and the wind howled through the trees. Adaeze felt power surge through her veins, more than she had ever known before. Then, a vision flashed before her eyes. She saw herself standing at the edge of Umuokeke, the villagers on their knees, bowing before her. She saw her parents looking at her with a mixture of fear and awe. She saw the future, a future where she was no longer just a girl, but something more, something beyond human. A sharp laugh escaped her lips. The fire blazed higher, the chants grew louder, and the dance became wilder. The air crackled with energy, and the very fabric of the night seemed to tremble in her presence. Adaeze threw her head back, arms outstretched, and let the darkness claim her fully. She had embraced her destiny. She was no longer just Adaeze. She was a witch, and the night belonged to her. The night air grew colder as Adaeze followed the old woman deep into the forest. The trees seemed taller, their branches curling like twisted fingers. Shadows moved between them, whispering in voices only she could hear. They walked for what felt like hours until they reached a wide clearing. A fire burned in the center, its flames an unnatural shade of blue. Surrounding it were women, dozens of them dressed in black, their eyes glowing in the darkness. "The time has come," the old woman announced. The witches turned to Adaeze, their faces unreadable. Then, as one, they began to chant, Their voices rose and fell like waves, filling the air with ancient words Adaeze did not recognize, but somehow understood. She is one of us. The flames shot higher, casting eerie shadows across the trees. The old woman stepped forward, her staff raised high. "Kneel, child," she commanded. Adaeze hesitated for only a moment before sinking to her knees. A strange calm settled over her. She was no longer afraid. The old woman reached into her robe and pulled out a small clay bowl filled with dark liquid. "Drink, and you will be reborn." Adaeze took the bowl, her hands steady. She brought it to her lips and drank deeply. The liquid was thick, bitter, and ice-cold, but the moment it touched her throat, a surge of power exploded within her. She gasped as visions filled her mind, secrets of the night, the power to bend nature, to control minds, to walk unseen among men. The world spun around her, and when she opened her eyes, she felt different. The witches cheered. "She is ready." The old woman smiled. "Rise, Adaeze, you are no longer just a girl. You are one of us now, a sister of the night." Adaeze stood, feeling the weight of her new identity settle over her. She had crossed the final threshold. There was no turning back. The witches' dance had begun,